set and see if we can get,
Pick the easy ones. Oh, here it is. Mailing list admin password for many couches. There it is. I have an admin password.
I guess we should start. I'll just check my presentation real quick. Get rid of that, get rid of that. And I need the agenda.
Oh, really? So if I click on a mail to link in Chrome, it opens Gmail?
Welcome to your googly world future.
I mean, that's pretty ballsy Google right there.
Okay. Be gone, Chromebook. Okay, we'll start in 1 minute. If folks could make their way to a seat or to the exit. Hey, Roy, you gonna be around this afternoon around 1 or so? I want you to talk to somebody.
Okay.
Testing.
I can hear myself. It's not too loud. So I don't know. It sounds okay. It sounds good. If we need to change, are you going to be in the back or? Yeah, I'll come or I'll signal or yeah. Thank you very much, sir.
Good morning, villagers. That's optimistic. This is the Quic Working Group. If you're not here for the Quic Working Group, you're in the wrong room. Echo, could you close that door over there by any chance? Thank you. I'd like to see the quick service. So, we're not one of those countries. This is the Note Well. These are the terms under which we all participate in the IETF regarding things like intellectual property as well as your behavior and our behavior as chairs.
It's ours too.
Yeah, you need to go. Okay. That includes the code of conduct. That includes the anti-harassment procedures, the processes that this working group works under, copyright, patents, all that fun stuff. If you are not intimately familiar with this, please take some time to put IETF Note Well into your favorite internet search engine and find out more. Lars has just dispatched the blue sheets. Thank you. We have a scribe?
Tommy Pauly.
Tommy Pauly, you are a king amongst men. Thank you. You back up with Brian Tremmel once again, wingman Tremmel.
And everybody can help in the same Etherpad as yesterday.
So we're doing the same Etherpad. Okay, great. Excuse me. Did the Etherpad work out okay yesterday? Did it crash at all or flaky a little bit? Okay, good to know. Good enough. Got the job done. Okay. Weird. Okay. All right. If folks could perhaps share the correct Etherpad in Jabber, that would be good. Okay. And who is going to relay Jabber for us? Ted, thank you so much. Very kind. Jabber is also relayed to the Slack for those who are on Slack. Agenda bashing. Let's see if we can see the agenda. So today, we reserved a very large block of time to discuss open issues. In Tokyo, we started a new thing. In the past, in both our interim and in our IETF plenary meetings, we have had the editors lead discussion on clusters of issues that they thought were important to move forward on. And we flipped that in Tokyo to just do a hard slog through the issues list one by one and try and come to some sense of the room for each issue that we thought we could. That seems to have worked out pretty well. I think everybody was pretty happy with the progress we made in Tokyo. So although this is a slightly different kind of room with a lot more people in it and a different setup, we thought we'd try that again. And so we're going to focus on first the transport and then the TLS, then the HTTP issues. We're going to reserve some time in the end to talk about planning future meetings, future interrupts. You know, how do we get to done? And we have an as time permits slot. We have overflow from yesterday. Sherry had a presentation, which I can't see.
On the top
There it is. Thank you. The quick connection migration. And then if we have time, we'll talk about quick offload, although with an L, because that's quick off food. And that's interesting.
Native speaker here.
We also have another one that is not on here. We created a proto design team yesterday, and we have an early report from that to discuss some potential progress. So I think we'll probably do that.
I would actually do this now.
I think we can do that first, yeah. So let's do that first, David, and then if you want to come on, migrate your way up here, perhaps.
And I think we're actually trying to get to both of the as time permits, and maybe Manasi it'll only 10 minutes. But depending on how the issues go, right, if we make the call at that time that we'd rather burn time on the issues, we'll do that. But I guess the plan is to leave enough slack at the end that we get to both of those.
It's not hyper important that we touch every issue. So let's do your presentation, David, and keep the time reasonable. And then I think the other thing we want to do is do a quick run through the triage of the late stage process. We'll do that right after this. So
Any bashing while we're...
Any bashing on all that? That seem good, everybody? Yes.
Can we, Mike? One second. Ian Swag, Google. Can we maybe time bound this part of it so we make sure we get through some of the other issues in case I don't really want to spend an hour on this today.
David, my understanding was you need 5 minutes.
Yeah, and
that's great.
If your name is on the first slide, you cannot come to the microphone to ask David any questions. I would like to have I would like a feedback from people who were maybe not participating in the design team on what David's going to summarize. Design isn't done.
Is there a consensus of the design team?
So we have some consensus. We are not entirely done yet. So I'm going to talk about what we currently have, but that doesn't mean that this won't change in the next hour.
Well, let's just have a time box discussion then.
So for those of you who weren't there yesterday, we decided to form a design team about what to do when to discard the old keys when you're doing key update. So can I have the clicker, please?
You can tell me to go next slide.
All right. I'm David Skazi from Google. The rest of the design team members are on the slide. Next slide, please. So quickly, the problem is in the Quic short headers, there's a key phase bit, which conceptually is the lowest order bit of the key epoch. So every time it just flips. The problem with that is if one side does key updates too quickly, let's say it does 2 key updates without the other side knowing, they can end up being out of sync. And that means that like all the packets get drops and the connection just dies. So next slide. We managed to agree on a lot of design principles, which was nice. So we really want to avoid child decryption in Quic. So we decided we wanted an explicit signal for when, okay, we are both agreed that we are now at epoch 1, so then it is possible to go to epoch 2. The third point has been relitigated since. So initially we really didn't want to key off of acknowledgements or retransmission because of some implementations. It was tricky. That one we're not 100% on consensus on, so more news coming soon. But the model in general we want for key updates in Quic is that any endpoint can initiate a key update, and then we require confirmation for the next one, but we don't want a mechanism where you negotiate and ask for permission before you key update in the first place. And another fundamental property is we want an endpoint to be able to update their own keys unilaterally, but also force the other side to update their send keys. The reason being that if the crypto bound for one of our ciphers is found to be weak or shorter, any of the 2 endpoints who knows this can kind of bring the whole lifetime down before key update. And we want implementations of whatever we're doing to be very simple and not required to keep like 1 RTT keys for every single epoch. Next slide, please. So the current proposal is to use one of the unused reserved encrypted bits in the short header. So we haven't bike shed which one of the 2 yet. That'll be fun. But next slide, please. The idea is also, we haven't bike shed the name, to have a key ready bit, which means you send it only once you receive something at this key level, and then you're not allowed to initiate a key update until you've received it. And it kind of ensures this latching of, okay, we're both here, great, now we can go there, wait for it, okay, we're both here, then we can move on. Next slide, please. Here's an example of how it works. So let's say you've been communicating at epoch 0 for a while. So you both have key phase 0 for that epoch and key ready 1, because you've both been receiving at this level. You're ready for a key update. Then A initiates a key update. So they update their write keys for sending at epoch 1. So they start sending with key phase 1, and now it becomes key ready 0, because they haven't received anything there. They're not latched up. When B receives this, they're forced to update their keys, so they update their read keys to be able to receive this, and they have to update their write keys. So now they send key phase 1 as well, but they're allowed to send key ready as 1, and they have to, because now they have received this, and both sides are in agreement about key phase 1. And then the moment A receives this, it updates its read keys, and is now allowed to move on to key epoch 2. And it sends key phase 1, key ready 1, and then everything's stable at key phase 1, key ready 1 until the next key update. Next slide, please. So one point that came out around the end that we haven't quite solved yet is, so if one side, let's say A, is just initiating key updates as fast as it can, which is like unreasonable. Let's say every RTT they do a key update. That's not what key updates are for. And B wants to be like safe on their implementation and only wants to keep 2 keys, and there is packet reordering on the network, you would end up in a case where like older packets from A end up arriving and you've already latched the key epoch twice, so those would get dropped and you would get a performance degradation. So there are 3 ways we get out of this. One is to B kind of holds back on saying, okay, now you're allowed to do a key update. Another one is A doesn't do a key update right away, and one is just to do absolutely nothing and say that if you're doing it this often, things fall over. So not a huge deal. At the end of the day, these are kind of an edge case, but that's one of the contention points. And next slide, please. that's it. Ian.
I had Ian Sweat, Google, and informational comment on the last slide, which is we have enough data from packet reordering in Quic that I would say that the previous issue you just raised is in practice not really a problem. I think something like 90% sum of connections literally experience no reordering through the entire connection. Packet reordering and dropping packets. So I mean, I would just say if you wanted to go with this design, I would suggest you just not solve that problem because like it really is not going to matter.
Thanks. And another point that someone brought up is that if you have a lot of reordering, your congestion controller is going to treat the packets as lost anyway.
Kazuhok, firstly, I just wanted to argue that, if you be having packet reordering depends on how you design the server deployment. So the fact that we don't see packet reordering now doesn't necessarily lead to the conclusion that we would never see that.
Fair enough. All right, that's all I had.
Right.
Okay.
So thanks for making a lot of progress here, guys.
Yeah. So we assume that you'll continue working together and get a more comprehensive proposal together, bring it to the group, and we'll take it from there.
Absolutely. We'll try to set up another meeting this week, which is getting kind of tight because everyone's very busy, but otherwise maybe on the Slack or something else informal in the next coming weeks.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. So let's look at this.
Make it bigger.
We'll get there. Let's see. That's an eye chart. There we go. Is that legible at the back? Ish. Is that legible at the back? Better. Okay. So as you hopefully know, in the last cycle, we've adopted a new process for the invariants, the transport, and the TLS drafts, where we have a higher bar for accepting new issues, and we require consensus to be achieved before the issue resolution is incorporated in the draft. And this is to take some load off of the editors and not make them the arbiters of where the working group consensus lies, and also to make sure that we actually get done on these drafts. And so we wanted to go through the current triage issues really quickly just to see if we can make a little progress on those, and to make sure that everybody's familiar with this process. This is the view that we're using. It's the project board on the GitHub issues list. I think it's project board 5. It's called late stage processing. And so what we do is when new issues get created that refer to these drafts, we put them in this triage bucket, and Lars and I go through them and figure out whether they're design issues or they're editorial issues, although the editors can claim obviously editorial issues. And if they're a design issue, we try and get a sense of whether there is interest in the working group in adopting that issue, so that if we think it's worth discussing effectively. And so right now we have 12 of these. Do we actually want to go through these now and try and do that? Or I think we probably, sorry?
The triage, you mean?
Yeah. I think we can probably do that on our own.
Sure.
And use this time for actual issue processing. Just want to familiarize people with what we're doing so that we're on the same page. And then the editorial issues are here. So right now we have 36 editorial issues against these drafts. We have 30 design issues, which is a few more than we had a couple of weeks ago, I'd say. And these are the ones that we need to actively discuss. Once the editors, and indeed we believe that there's consensus emerging on a proposal, we add the has proposal label. So ideally, if there's a pull request against it that we think reflects emerging consensus. And then we do a consensus call on the lists. And once we confirm that there's consensus, Lars and I will label it as has consensus. And then once the editors actually incorporate that consensus, usually just merge the PR, the issue gets closed. And so that's the process we're going through on these late stage documents.
4 issues have gone through all of that chain so far, which is not a lot comparing that we have 30.
Actually 3, one of these is a note.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Even better.
Yeah. So we hope
4 actually, the one that's in the consensus declared has actually been merged.
it's been merged.
It
Okay.
wasn't properly linked.
I think
So
you just need to close the issue.
I'll close it now.
Okay. Oh, you're right. It didn't have the flag in there, right? So that's 4. That's not bad, but we have 30 to go. And we have people who want to add more to that 30. So this is where we sit with this stuff. We'll be done when we close the issues. Does everybody understand that? Just want to make sure that we're on the same page with that. Jonah? Did you have a?
Jan, I was just going to say that there are some of those issues were already discussed and resolved in Tokyo. We just haven't gotten around to getting them in the text in yet.
We need to get some text
But that's-
together and then vote on that text.
It's a caveat.
Sorry, not vote. Declare consensus. Yeah. Okay. So in the spirit of that, I think what we want to do now is go through the open issues.
Yeah, but not the editorial ones, I think. The
No,
design,
no,
yeah,
no, oh,
yeah,
no, no, no. I think let's go ahead and use the view that's linked from the agenda because we can bucket them by draft rather than putting them all together. So starting with transport issues. No, that's not what I wanted.
Let's go to Amy e-learning.
Oh, come on. It's a really small screen. Does that say HTTPS? Okay.
Yay.
All right. Great. So these are the design issues we have open for transport currently. Are transport parameters mandatory? 2528. Where are we at with this?
Martin Thompson, I think we're done with this one. The consensus seems to be emerging saying that we want the transport parameters to be mandatory. If the client doesn't send them, the server can't, which turns out to be really awkward for a number of things. And so it's easier to just make them mandatory for both of them. I don't think anyone has any interest in doing anything otherwise. For instance, if you don't send these things, you can't open any streams, you can't send any data. It's ridiculous. So we may as well just make them mandatory, I think was the conclusion that everyone's come to that I've spoken to.
Can for the benefit of the folks in the room who haven't been following that, Martin, don't go away. Can you state what you think the proposal is then?
Add one line of text saying both clients and server must include transport parameters. If they don't, the peer must close the connection with blah, 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 blah. We'll pick an error code as appropriate.
Thank you.
Mike Bishop, and to be clear, I think this is saying that you have to include the extension to carry the transport parameters in the TLS handshake, but that no individual transport parameter must be present. Hypothetically, you could include the extension and it's empty.
Right.
So we're waiting for somebody to write a PR?
Yeah.
Do we have a volunteer to write a PR? Ecker? Thank you.
But I'm not hearing any pushback in the room. So we can record that and then confirm that on this once we have a PR.
Yep. Ecker to write a PR.
I can assign it to Ecker.
Yeah, that's actually what. Too late.
So the argument Martin's offering really only pushes that clients have to send it. So I'm happy to require servers to send it too, but that's not necessary for this function to work. But you prefer symmetry, okay?
Okay, thank you. Next up, oh, fun.
Yeah, that is.
2496. Yes, Martin Duke, you might as well. Quick ossification. No, let's just go through them. Martin, why don't you summarize what this is and where we're at?
Yeah, this is Martin Duke. So I asked the chairs to time box this because I don't think we're anywhere near consensus about this at all. But the nature of the issue is that we've put a lot of effort into blocking ossification quick, and yet the easiest and dumbest thing for Middlebox to do is just say if version is greater than one, drop. This was an issue in TLS where, TLS 1.3 pretends to be 1.2 and has some other hidden field that says that it's 1.3. I'm not sure, I don't have a great solution by any means. We had a long discussion on a list. We talked about possible obfuscation methods. and so on. But I think the working group should spend some time thinking about a strategy if this happens. And if the answer is that we're going to fake people out like we did in TLS and have a fake version field and actually do something else, then maybe 4 bytes is too much to waste on the version field.
Yes, let's do time box this. So let's be brief.
So Martin, this question is almost a research topic, and so I'm inclined to say that we do nothing about this. I appreciate the concern, but ultimately, the problem that we have is that we're talking with a peer that we don't have any prior context with, so we don't have any shared secrets or any way to authenticate the information that's coming along. All we have is a published specification, and that specification will be published. Everyone will have that specification. So no matter what we do in that first message that we send, it will be possible for someone on the network to identify that as Quic v1, Quic v2, whatever version of Quic that they understand. It is true that we could smuggle something in there that they don't know about yet that looks like an extension and whatever else, but they could just decide not to allow those things that they don't understand, and we're back in the soup. So the game is such that I don't think we're going to win it if someone wants to fight it. So may as well not do anything about it. And the version system that we have is crude, but it's not really all that much of a burden. So I would rather keep it.
Okay, just interjection. I've always kind of thought of this issue as quick version ossification. Is that uncontroversial?
Yeah.
And I think the way that we can make a little bit of progress here in a time-boxed fashion, and I'm almost at the point of saying we should cut the queues, is that at the end of the queue, let's take a hum.
The entire queue is nodding when you said cut.
Yeah, exactly. They're happy with that decision.
We're here. Cut the queue after me. You can cut it right here if you want. I mean,
when we're done a time box discussion, I think we should do a hum and see who thinks we need to try and address this and who doesn't. And if we can make that progress today, I think that's a bit of a win. So let's not spend too much time before we get to that. Go.
Brian Trammell, recovering researcher. This is a really interesting research topic. I think that there probably was an alternate design that we could have used at some point where we could have made some progress here, which is deploy arbitrarily many versions of Quic at the same time to make this not worth it. That is not going to get me happy looks from the chairs at this point in the process. I think that the discussion in this issue should show up somewhere in some document.
Sorry, you mean not just version numbers, but
actual
behavioral differences in the
behaviors.
versions.
Yes.
Meaningful versioning,
Meaningful
not just
versions,
numbers.
yeah. Not because numbers is not meaningful. Numbers is very easy to add to a table. You don't have to. You have to set up so you exercise different code paths with the different versions, right? I think that this discussion, we've had it I think now twice in the list and once in this issue. I think it needs to be captured in some document somewhere that comes out of the working group. Maybe not one of the core documents. Maybe as an appendix to manageability. I'm not sure where it goes, but I think that we do want to capture the fact that we've thought of this somewhere. But beyond that, I think that given where we are, punt.
It might be something for the applicability statement where we say, we recognize that this is a problem, and if people start, blocking future versions of Quic versions larger than one, we know that there's countermeasures that we can do, but we'd rather not.
Yeah, you're right.
So
that does
please don't block versions greater than one.
We can get that in the applicability statement. I think that's good.
The queue is now closed. Martin, you're in an uncertain state as regarding the queue. Jana.
Jana Engar. To Martin's comment earlier, condition control is a research topic. We still do it though. So just because it's a research topic doesn't mean that we shouldn't do anything at all. My general, I proposed a couple of things on the list about this. I agree that this is not a problem we don't understand the problem here fully well either. We don't know exactly what's going to get ossified. That said, I think that we can, if you can do something that's not terribly difficult to do, but we can avoid version ossification, it'd be worth doing it, even if it is simple obfuscation, because I can tell you from experience that vendors do not even go read the spec. Like if I can get them to go read the spec, that's for me achievement unlocked, right? So as it is, the bar is fairly low here, to be clear, in what I believe we may need to do to just avoid like basic level of ossification, and the bar is there though. Like it's just sending one number on the wire for a long period of time runs the risk of getting that ossified. And I've talked about this in the past with Google's experience with this first byte, and it's a real thing. And for what it's worth, I still don't know what happens when Google changes that first byte from 9 to whatever it's going to be next. So there's some real pain there that should be anticipated. I don't want to build like a whole huge castle here.
And we don't want to stop somebody researching, right? The question. So if somebody comes up with a proposal during the Quic version 1 timeline that gives us new information or lets us build a mechanism here rather than saying we don't know what we should do, that's fine, right? I think it's basically the question is are we at that stage now? And I don't think the answer is yes. And it also means we're not going to hold up Quic version 1 for an answer, right? But if somebody is working on this and has input that lets us revisit this, by all means, right, reopen it, or we're going to discuss it again. But I think the question is what to do with this now.
Right. Are you asking for proposals right now at the mic?
No,
I don't think you are.
No, we're not. One version of the hum in my mind is solving this issue on the critical path for Quic v1.
Which means it would be a blocker.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to yield the mic.
Mike Bishop. So fundamentally, I feel like this is unwinnable. So if you have one version, they can ossify on it. If you have some kind of predictable scattering across several version numbers, they can ossify on that set, no matter how large the set is. The only way that you win this is if you encrypt it, and we don't have an encryption context at this point yet. So we could do something like we did with the initial packet, where they have to read the spec and get the salt, but it would have to be a version-independent salt, which could then ossify. We just can't reliably win this. And so I'm inclined to maybe we have a little ossification proposal so that they have to do a little bit of work to ossify us, but ultimately we just ship Quic. And the best defense against this is we're already using version numbers greater than 1, they're draft versions. And we keep moving on drafts of future versions. So we need to deploy them. Yeah, the best defense against this is deploying draft versions and draft versions of Quic v2 and keep moving.
So, Philip Thiesel, I have another idea how to make this a little bit more complicated to ossify on is just having a lot of version aliases. And this alias version numbers are not used by default or are not part of the standard, but just be sent by the server at the handshake, can be cached by the client, and then can be used for later connection to that server. And so we can really spread a huge space of this version number. They get a timeout, so you can reuse these code points later on for real version numbers. So you can make it harder to ossify on this bit because you have a really large set which depends on the server.
Yeah, Eric Escola. I think it's probably, I don't agree with John, but I like the way that he sort of phrased the threat model here, which is where we should start, as usual. Namely, there are people who have not read the specification, looking at stuff on the wire, and there are people who read the specification, and and then there are people, and so fixing interference between the two sets is different. Clearly we can if the threat model is only people in the specification, there are a bunch of kind of sleazy things we can do, XOR with the last 32 bits of the packet, that kind of stuff, right? If your threat model is people who have read the specification, then all you can do is you need side information of some kind, like in the DNS, like SNI, or like the suggestion Philip just made. So that's probably the first thing to do is establish the threat model. My sense, for what it's worth, and all those things are much more complicated. My sense for what it's worth is that while the initial ossification does in fact happen, as Jana suggests, by people from the specification, the experience with TLS 1.3 was that plenty of people that we ran into problems with clearly had read the specification, had complete implementations. They might have read it well, but they'd read it, they're man-in-the-middle proxies, for instance, right? So And so I think what we opted to do, instead of trying to like fight them on this, was like really, really clearly state what your obligations were as like a device in this category. And we don't know if it's going to work because like, we've only gone through one cycle of this, but so I mean, I guess my sense is that anything we can do, these people aren't lazy. They just aren't forward thinking. And so anything we do that like is like, all you have to do is read the spec and pull something out of the spec or pull some critique of the spec, they will eventually figure out because they're actually willing to write a fair amount of code. They're just not willing to like think about the ecosystem effects bigger.
Ecker, so if I understand you correctly, you don't think that designing something that just gets people to read the spec is going to help?
I don't think it'll help very much. It'll get you some, but it won't get you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with 1.3, right, was like you had to get you drive the error number down, like to basically concomitant with like ordinary 1.2. I don't think we get that far. So I guess I think to answer Lars's question, I think this should not block deployment of Quic. And if someone comes up, if people, but if people decide that if people want to do something, then I'd suggest that they start with that threat model and say, sorry, exactly what threat model you're trying to hit, and then we can evaluate a proposal against those.
Okay.
Okay. So I heard like three different, there's the, it's a blocker, which I don't think anybody spoke for. So I think we can take that off the table. And then basically that leaves, we close this issue without any text changes, other than maybe a note in the applicability statement that discusses that, but no spec changes. The other option that I think I heard at least some people express is whether it's worthwhile to have a simple obfuscation that gets multiple version numbers used that all fall back to the Quic v1 protocol. Christian is shaking his head and Jenna is nodding. That is very confusing to me. They're sitting right next to each other. So I think that was the only other thing that I heard, and I don't know if I captured it well. Brian,
do you have a suggestion?
No, I was just pointing out that I just noticed that Miria is actually already filing an issue to bring this discussion into applicability. So yeah, no, the suggestion is basically yes. I think that's where we are. Close and move to applicability.
My suggestion would be then we do close it now and we have some text that reflects it in applicability. And if somebody would like to propose a simple obfuscation scheme. And then now make you run to the microphone. We open a new issue for that. No?
What I would like to put in the applicability is to say there are different versions, there are draft versions, whatever. So it's like just a deployment consideration if you want to use them and help this problem eventually.
But the question is though, should the spec that we ship as version 1 use in some way either multiple version numbers or everybody's shaking their head.
So I'll basically
just close it and applicability deals with it.
Yeah, I agree with that. By the way, for what it's worth, Jenna Ingar here, and I think that what we need for the ecosystem to be healthy is for enough traffic to basically do more than just one version number, and that we can figure out in other ways. We don't need to write this in the draft.
Okay,
that's what I think.
Okay.
I prefer to keep this open and continue the discussion. I find the proposal that Philip made interesting. I haven't thought about that enough yet. I would like to explore this idea further.
I think the
continued interest in this shows that this is a real problem, and we shouldn't just close it and say we're done.
I'd like to establish what the level of interest is before we make that assumption, because we're also in a state where we really do need to be closing.
I guess I think I would just remark this quickly too, and then if which is what we've been doing, which is effectively closing it. What?
I think the argument is that
I understand the argument. What I want to do is table it, and not revisit it until there's substantially new information for the work to think about. And I don't know what exact flags you use for this purpose. But what I don't want to do is discuss it like the next meeting when we have another proposal which is substantively no different from the ones we've already seen.
And that's closing the issue and waiting for new information.
Sounds fine to me. I guess what I would say is there's like a series there's like a series of possible options, and we could and any one of them, I think a number of us could design some exemplar of them. So certainly like it's like I or Martin or you know or Martin could design a perfect good obfuscation scheme that would be as good as anyone else. So I don't want to I don't want a bike share whether it's the first bytes or the last bytes or whatever we obfuscate with. So I think if someone wants to do this, come back with something that's a fundamentally new category or a fundamentally new threat model, or get consensus on the threat model, rather than say, oh no, now we have a proposal to to XOR the last 4 bytes instead of the first 4 bytes. And that's reconsider that separately. That doesn't make any sense.
Let's maybe close the line after David.
Yeah. So Martin Thompson, I want to put my weight behind the done as a feature aspect of this one. I think John has suggested that we put some text in the applicability statement, which I think we might need to spend some time discussing. But the core point here is that we don't know exactly what a good solution is or what the requirements are really when we get down to it for any solution. And we can proceed, and those people who are interested can go off and do the research and come back to us. And if that happens before we ship, then great. And if it doesn't happen before we ship, then I would prefer to carry on. I know this is just a judgment call, but that's what I prefer to see.
Dave Skazi, very quick point. Well, first off, to Ecker's point, we can't put the Quic version as a V2 feature because the version is in the invariants. It's not something we can figure out later. But anyway, just quickly in terms of process, I personally think this is interesting, but I totally agree that we can table it until there are more concrete proposals. That said, in general, anytime someone comes up with a PR that has a proposal in it, the answer is please file an issue. So does it make sense to close this if then people are going to come? We want people to come in with proposals. So then when they do, should we reopen it? That's all I'm asking.
Yeah, that's an interesting.
Let's cross that bridge when we get to it.
Yeah. I don't think that we're going to stand on process so much that we'll say, no, we can't discuss it if we agree to that. Yeah.
I realize you got one. Sorry, but I do have one comment. Ian Sweat, Google. We are going to be in a position where we are going to be stuck supporting something that looks a lot like IETF Quic, that is going to be a draft version for at least 12 months after V1 ships, probably longer, to my sadness. And I guess the point is we're going to probably have something like 3 or 4 different versions that all look kind of in the shape of IETF Quic, of various drafts or other things prior to V1, concurrently with V1. And so hopefully we can get our crap together as a working group and ship out V2 before we deprecate all the previous draft versions. And that will mean that a substantial portion of the actual Quic traffic on the internet will still be using other non-V1 versions. And I hope that will mitigate this. I mean, I think that's a good incentive to actually ship V2 in a reasonable time frame.
And this might even generalize, right? A lot of the different implementations have claimed private version space, and maybe when you ship your V1, you also still negotiate your private version, which is V1. That might help a little bit too. Okay, so there's 3 options here that Mark brought up.
Does this make sense as options?
Are they readable?
Yeah.
Can't hear you.
What about leave open and unblock?
Leave open and unblock.
That's just a process distinction. I'm not going to get into the fine distinctions here. I think we just need to get a sense of what people in the group feel they want to do.
Eric Kinnear, just to pick a very minor nit, I'd be somewhat interested in some scheme. It doesn't have to be an obfuscation scheme. So I'm tempted to try to reword 2 as close, but take proposal if someone makes one that gains consensus.
Thank you. All right, queues are empty.
Miriam?
We're empty.
Yeah, I don't think there's a difference between 1 and 2, because even if we decide we don't change it, we might still change it, right? So it's right, either close or leave it open and block.
Well, so before I do any what I wanted to ask was, can we see a show of hands? Who intends to put some effort into coming up with a proposal for something in this space? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hands.
All right.
8. I guess I'm concerned that if we formed a design team, they'd come back with something, and then we'd still have
No.
the discussion about what the actual threat model is.
So my
and that doesn't
suggestion would
seem
be
productive.
everybody who put their hand up finds Martin Seaman, and you guys figure out if you have anything like a shared interest, and don't form a design team, but maybe discuss this a little bit. But I still would like to have an answer for now, right? And Miriam makes a fair point, right? We can always, even if we close it with no action, we are on a computer system, we can actually reopen it. Somebody comes back. A shadow design team. That only the IAB does that.
I think, yeah, that was convincing. With the context of this conversation in mind by everyone, I think it'd give those folks who want to come up with that proposal good information.
Right.
If we can get a sense of where people are leaning in terms of what they want to see here. Aaron, are you approaching the mic?
Unfortunately,
Hi,
yes.
Aaron Falk. Just a suggestion that the option 2, you may have a variant of option 2 that is block V1 for some fixed period of time to ensure that the design team produces something. And
I don't want to put timers on issues.
All right. All
right, those are the two.
I think let's just get a sense of the room, and then people can act accordingly. Hum, if you believe we should close this with no action. Some very good hummers there in the middle. And Hum, if you believe we should leave this open and potentially block V1 until we figure this out.
No, not potentially, block.
Yeah, okay. Hum now, please.
Just a clarification, does it blocks V1 or not?
Block.
It
V1.
does.
Yeah. And I did hear a much less loud hum, but there was some, and it seemed to be much further in the back, which is probably why up here it sounded.
Yeah.
I would still say we have consensus for 1. It was not unanimous. It wasn't very rough either.
It was not incredibly rough. I think we should take this to the list. I think if people want to argue to keep this open, the most compelling thing I heard was from Ecker in terms of let's establish what threat model we can actually agree upon here. And I think we made a little progress in that. But until we really nail that down, we're going to have a back and forth that won't end. So let's focus on that first before we talk about specific mechanisms. But we'll try and establish consensus in the list and see how we go.
All right.
Okay.
How are we doing on time?
Probably horribly. Where'd my page go? Oh, here we go.
Okay. Amelia, when you have opened your issue for applicability, stick it into this so people can. It's already in. Okay, thanks. Yeah, just stick a link into this issue so people can follow it over. Okay. I should probably parallelize and pull up the project board.
Next up, 2473 connection ID length changes. Martin Duke.
Yes, let me try to remind myself what. The spec forbids you to go from a zero-length connection ID to a non-zero-length connection ID, should you find that you have a migration scenario you weren't anticipating. And it was not clear to me why that would be the case. And I wanted, and this issue is about possibly allowing that change. And the first comment is not reflective of, I think, where I ended up.
Is there a proposal in here at the end?
Yeah, well, yeah, in the middle somewhere.
By you?
Yes. There it is. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm reading my own work here in real time. But yes, but I believe the idea here is that you have a zero-length connection ID field, and then you can suddenly have, and you can get new connection IDs that allow you, or you can provide new. I'm mistaking that. I have no connection ID. I then provide people with new connection IDs that are non-zero length, and then if there's a migration event, I can switch to it.
Ian Sweat, Google. I think the one reason for arguing for allowing this is that there may be peer-to-peer use cases or such where like typically 5 tuple is sufficient, and then maybe in other circumstances it's not sufficient and you only know later on. I mean, I think the biggest argument for bidirectional zero-length connection IDs I see is peer-to-peer, and that's the one case we're at Google using it. So.
Okay. So you'd like to accept a proposal along these lines?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy also for the HTTP3 draft to say like you can't do this. So.
Kazuhoko, firstly, my comment was that my comment on the issue was that I don't understand the value of this, but even though that's still the case, I don't argue strongly against making this change. So.
Okay. So Martin Thompson, this forces whoever does this to do trial decryption. So if you go from 1 to none, you have packets potentially coming in that have bits in the front of them. That you might be able to recognize the old connection ID and pull those apart, but there's a non-zero probability that those were genuinely the output of the AED as well. And so, yes, it's entirely possible. And the other way around, if you decide to go from 0 to something, I guess you could say that you could only go to connection IDs that are sufficiently long that the odds of collision are vanishingly small, which is certainly the case if you have a very long connection ID. But you're effectively going into trial decryption territory. And David's going to disagree with me.
Thank you.
Mike Bishop, depending on how you look at it, we're effectively trial decrypting anything anyway. We decrypt it, see if it worked, and if it didn't, we drop it. So if we go from 0 to a connection ID, yes, there's a chance of collision. Either way, we're going to attempt to decrypt it one time. Maybe you attempt to decrypt it a second time. Yes, that's possible. But you can recognize the connection ID coming up front. I'm not as concerned about going from 0 to a connection ID that you've previously issued. The idea that you could ever go back to 0 after you've done that, that means you're trial decrypting everything. If you see a connection ID you don't recognize, but it comes in from this 5 tuple, then you attempt to decrypt it as a 0. That feels a little shakier.
So thank you, Martin, for precising that I will be disagreeing with you. And now for my next trick, I will explain why. Quic doesn't exist in a vacuum. Underneath us, we have UDP, we have IP. There are information in those bits. So imagine a scenario where you can connection migrate, where if you're actually running over IPv4, you have a connection ID because you need that to land you here. Say your client is sharing the port. But imagine you migrate to IPv6 and you have a bajillion IPv6 addresses. You can encode information there. And so you do not need trial decryption if you know how to get to the connection from information outside of Quic. So I think maybe this use case is kind of crazy and not that useful, but it's a real one. It's something that people might want to do. And I would think it would be silly to prevent them from doing that.
Christian Wittmer. I am a bit confused by the problem there because I don't see any particular problem for a node receiving connection IDs from the peer and picking one of them. And if the peer advertises 7 different connection IDs with 7 different lengths, so be it. That means that the peer is ready somehow to process that. That's their problem. If we want to the issue is, okay, the peer has proposed the length 4 and realized that's not enough and wants to use the length 8 or something like that. Or 0. That means that what the peer has to do is renege, or whatever, how you say that in English, renege? What? Take back. Take back connection IDs that it has already proposed because it realized that it was wrong. So in that case, we would have a mechanism similar to retire connection ID that says, oh, I propose you this old connection ID, but they're not good for me anymore. Please remove them from your list. And I think that if you want to do that, we have serious synchronization issues. So my vote is to not do anything.
May I just interject to clarify? So again, this issue is confusing because I started saying something different at the top of it, which was about, do we really allow people to change the length of their connection ID? And everyone kind of agreed that was fine. I'm not sure if Christian agrees, but this issue migrated into saying that there's a specific restriction in the spec that says if you have a zero length CID, you cannot switch to having a non-zero length CID. And say again? And vice versa. And I was questioning why that was and if we should just remove the restriction.
Martin Thompson. There is maybe a scenario that in what David describes that is valid. It requires migration onto a new path that supports having no connection IDs. You could then change to sending no connection IDs, but you don't control that situation. Your peer controls the situation, and your peer decides to use the connection IDs that you offer it. And so it may still continue to use the connection IDs that are non-zero length in that context, and never use the zero length one, and vice versa. And you also, if you start with zero length connection IDs, a peer might migrate to the path where you need the non-zero length connection IDs and still continue using the zero length connection ID because that's perfectly valid according to the protocol. It gets worse because you have to deal with the fact that pairing up connection IDs to stateless reset tokens is not possible when you have zeros involved. The idea is that you can have, what a zero is effectively any number of connection IDs. And you can't do stateless resets with a zero length connection ID, but this would require that you have to deal with the consequences of having zero length connection IDs. Do I send multiple new connection ID frames with different stateless reset tokens? Does that even make sense? And how do you match that? How do you even generate a stateless reset in those scenarios? It's all worth considering.
So before we have the
complication
queue
here is
grow,
pretty significant.
Yeah. Before we have the queue grow too much, I'm not hearing much support for changing this so far. Do people in the queue want to argue for doing so? Okay. Well, let's try and get through it quickly, just looking at the time.
Yeah, Kulian, so maybe we need something like a transfer parameter saying that the server does or does not allow zero connection ID or wishes to do it.
In terms of David Skenazy, Google, another use case that I mentioned that maybe we could special case is the server preferred address, because in that case you do have control over when you do switch to that. Yeah, and so maybe if we can restrain it to that, I'd be okay. But in general, I think I keep my position of restricting something that doesn't cause damage here. Yeah, so this is a specific case that we discussed in the issue, and it's a very long issue. I would like to see a new issue open for that one, but I'd be supportive of allowing a server that negotiates a connection ID during the handshake to set a zero-length connection ID in its preferred address, which basically means that if you decide as a client to switch across to my unicast address, then you don't need a connection ID in that context, and that would be an interesting thing to have. That I'm supportive of. I don't know how we do the V4, V6 split, because I can imagine scenarios where V6 is okay with that and all of those things. But having a separate issue to discuss that, I think, would be reasonable, and we could work on a proposal for that. That would be okay with me. I can take the action item to write that issue.
But that would be closing this issue with no action. Okay.
Ian Sweat, Google. I think that's probably the right way forward. I was going to say I don't think we're getting consensus on changing this, even if I would like to change it. So I think we should probably close it. But I think that's a good suggestion.
Janine, I had a more basic question. How many people are going to use this if it's available? No, don't say. Are you definitely going to use it? But it might. If there's a knob, I might turn it too. The question is, do you have a use case for it? Because I understand that the theoretical flexibility we are talking about is fine, but you can always have a theoretical flexibility at any point in time with a transport parameter extension. That's why we have extension mechanisms. I'm loath to keep adding more things that are unnecessary at this point in time, and nobody is really going to use it right now. So my request to the chairs at least would be to find out if this is a feature that anybody's going to use right now.
I think we have to. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I think what I heard is that we're going to close this one. There's going to be a new one, which is a subset, and then we can have a discussion of whether that subset is still something that people are going to.
Yeah, the subset is still the same question, but just a tighter form of the same question. Even in that subset, I'm asking if anybody's going to use it right now.
So people's opinion on the subset might not change, but it may, and so let's at least close this one. Let's see a new issue that isn't like 37 screens long, and see if there's progress that can be made on that, or if that also gets closed with no action.
So I think maybe a quick hum might just help guide that a little bit. I'm thinking of asking if folks believe that in the specific case of the server preferred address, we should be loosening things here. And then should we be loosening things more generally, or whether things are just fine as they are. So first hum, if you believe in the specific case of the server preferred address, we should be loosening this requirement, please hum now.
I don't hear anything over the sound of the fan.
A little bit over here. Okay. You're good at this. But those guys, okay. Oh yeah, you left your ringer at home, okay. If you believe that this needs to be loosened more broadly than just the server preferred address, please hum now.
Well, there's a little bit of something, but
that was still over there, I think.
Okay.
You're double humming, okay.
We hear something in the background, but it's similar to those questions.
There's fans up here on the stage.
Okay, let's just use hands.
If you want to hum.
And finally, if people feel that this is just fine as it is, please hum now. That is a much broader hum.
It's not an angry hum, though.
That's a hum we can hear.
Yeah. So I would call it large consensus for the last option.
I think so, too. I think that's something we can take to the list. If people believe that they can raise a new issue and that contains enough information to justify that, since we're in this new late-stage process, please do so, but know that you're going to have to bring the evidence to the group of a concrete use case to convince people. Make sense? Okay.
Next.
Let me record a little state here.
I promise these are getting easier.
You're getting in line for the next one already?
Well, yeah, the next one's mine too.
Oh, we might not go in order.
I promise they're getting easier.
If you know which one the next one is, why don't you get started?
Okay. So the next one is issue number 2471, stateless reset lacks normative text. I actually have no position on this, except that if you read it, it does. There's no there's some musts and so on about how you build the stateless reset, but no rules whatsoever, no guidance whatsoever on whether I'm supposed to send them, how often I'm supposed to send them, what I need to do if I get one, et cetera, et cetera. So I would just like this. I mean, this could be an editorial issue if everyone agrees on what we should be doing, but I'm reading it, I had no idea.
This feels like something we should assign to someone. Go ahead, Mike.
Mike Bishop. So fundamentally, stateless reset is an optimization. You don't have to do it at all. So I would be supportive of making it a should. It's definitely not a must.
Jana Iyengar, on the receiver side, I think it's whether you try to see if it's a stateless reset or not is really, I think it's a may, again, because it's in your best interest to try and do that. But if you don't do that, yeah.
Oh, wow. I thought we were going to agree there for a second, Jana. Yeah, I guess
You can still agree with them.
Yeah, I could, but I don't. So, I mean, I think stateless reset is something that's optional for the server, but I don't understand any reason why it should be optional for the client. You say it's in the client's interest, but also in the server's interest at the flight of packet stop. And so, I mean, I guess I don't really understand, given, what's the argument for it not being required for the client to actually say this reset?
Yeah, Martin Thompson, I think that's
fine. I think the word endpoint rather than client, because for some reason we made it symmetrical. But yes, I think if you receive one of these things, I think it should be something along the lines of a must. If we didn't do that, I think that's just a mistake, editorial mistake, because it doesn't make any sense not to do it that way. So I'm almost in favour of flipping this to editorial and making sure that we have the right text. And maybe we'll run it by the list to make sure that everyone, there's no surprises there, but.
Let's keep it designed to make sure we get everybody's buy-in.
Happy to do that.
Are you happy to write a proposal?
Yes, though I'll need Martin's help in identifying those things where holes need patching, because.
I have a multiple Martin assignment problem here. There we go.
You believe that's all the holes? I'm happy to look it over again. Okay, well, we'll do that.
Okay, so I send it to both of you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. I won't bother recording state there because I think that's pretty straightforward. 2464. Martin.
This one I hope is very short, and then I'm done, I think. Sorry, everyone. The zero RTT, the transport parameter section talks about zero RTT connections and what stuff you need to remember. And a lot of transport parameters don't make any sense to remember. Like, for instance, the stateless reset token is not reusable from connection to connection. And so this issue is basically about just kind of going through all of them and figuring out what was actually worth saving, what was not, because the spec technically requires you to save them all. And there's a PR for this that I think we've reached rough consensus on, and I'm kind of surprised it isn't merged already. But Martin, I don't know if you are waiting for anything else on this PR.
It might not have gotten the consensus call yet.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes. You were going to take it to the list. So that's all we've got. That's all we're waiting on.
So we can label this one as proposal then, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a PR that's been through the ringer, and I think it just needs consensus call.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you.
Next one is 2458. Martin Thompson.
So this is an offshoot of the discussion that we had about what frame types are allowed in zero RTT packets. Sorry. And so there was a realization in that discussion that we didn't really have any strict rules about what it is that could go in zero RTT packets. And one of those rules was you should not include in a zero RTT packet a reaction to a one RTT packet. Reason being that if you are able to read one RTT packets, you should probably be sending them. And the pull request that's associated with this put some rules around that. And I think this one has proposal state, but there was a lot of discussion here. Oh, no, it's not that much discussion.
It doesn't, it says, no, it doesn't have proposal state.
So, Mike Bishop, the discussion on this got kind of scattered because there's one PR that is conceptually right. It describes what clients need to do, and it's not very concrete how a server detects that the client has violated it. The other one, which I wrote, specifies exactly how a server could detect it, but it's not as strong a statement on what the client has to do because the only restriction is what the server can detect. I think in general, we have agreement that the ideas of 2461 are the right proposal, and 2466 is, I think, the only way to detect that you violated it, but we haven't merged them, and we haven't combined them yet.
So if you two combine it, then we can take it to the list and get a consensus on that.
Double assignment.
There's a question about principles here again, and it's a similar one to what we've been having with respect to this key update thing that we didn't talk about earlier. But the basic question is whether we operate on the basis that we enforce behavior, or whether we operate on the basis that we simply describe what behavior the client must abide by. And this is really the split between the two pull requests. I would say that I'm okay with adding some text about what the server can detect to my pull request, but I would rather not rely solely on enforcement rules in this one, because we just can't rely on, if we have non-cooperating peers in this regard, then we don't really have a protocol. We just have adversaries slinging rocks at each other.
Welcome to the internet.
Yeah, I mean, generally, like, I think it's fine for things to be enforceable, but like, protocol is full of requirements that are like effectively non-enforceable. In fact, Ian just pointed this one out to me earlier about connection IDs and linkability, where like, I don't know how to enforce that from the remote side. So I guess what I don't want to do is jump through a lot of design hoops in order to make like mechanisms only purpose is to allow the peer to enforce that you're behaving correctly. Generally, we expect you to behave correctly. So, and you know, if we find you're not, like, and it's especially true, by the way, just going back to philosophy, it's especially true if, like, you can detect people behaving incorrectly, but like not with 100% reliability, but like they're almost certainly behaving incorrectly, like you can call them on the phone and complain. I don't think you need to file a bug. I don't think, like, the idea that, like, I don't understand what's going to happen otherwise. It's not like your implementation is going to send a missile over their side, like, automatically and pull them up.
Kazuhoku, firstly, the reason I raised this issue was that because I wanted to limit the amount of data that the client can send in zero RTT, and therefore my preference has been to use a mask node, and well, on the other hand, allow the server to detect if it's linked to. I just wanted to clarify my position.
I don't know if we're going to make much more progress here. I think we probably should take it to the list, or the issues list. Yeah. But Mike and Martin, if you guys could work together a bit more, that would be helpful. That was 2458, correct? So now we have 2441. Peers that only terminate a single connection on an IP port cannot
Would you like me to summarize this?
Please.
Cool. So if you are using, for example, bidirectional 0-byte connection IDs, and you are communicating between two peers, that is the only connection between those two peers, i.e. WebRTC, peer-to-peer, yada, yada, and one of those peers would like to migrate addresses intentionally, the current text says you cannot do that. I would like to allow that because it seems useful, like WebRTC. That's it.
So I absolutely agree with you, Ian, that it's useful to be able to migrate connections to WebRTC. But my assumption had always been that WebRTC, you would migrate it with ICE, and then you would just start sending. And so in fact, I would expect WebRTC you wouldn't even do path challenge, because that's how you do migration with like DTLS SRTP, for instance, right? So so I think like, my perspective is that when we get around to binding Quic to peer-to-peer channels, we're going to find that like the IP addresses are like largely irrelevant, and you should be and they should exist a layer below, rather than existing at the same layer. That's what we found when we did WebRTC, we did SRTP, basically, and with SCTP, right? The IP addresses just don't consciously exist at that level. They exist at effectively the ICE level, and ICE gives you an abstraction that's basically like I'm sending the other dude, who's identified in some unspecified way, and then ICE just takes care of the routing. Because one thing, so I think like we'll just need to like effectively pass the specification at that point to like say basically ignore the IP addresses. I think.
Yeah. So Martin Thompson, another way of saying the same thing. WebRTC provides path validation for free, or it's at least external, and so you don't need to worry about all the connection migration machinery. The IP addresses don't actually matter. Yeah. ICE provides all that capability.
Mike Bishop, fundamentally, we were talking about trial decryption earlier. The connection ID is what allows you to not have to process all the random junk coming in from the internet, no matter where it came from. If you have a zero-length connection ID, then what's providing you that validation is that it's coming in on the same 5-tuple, or an identifiable address if you're using ICE. I feel like if you're using ICE, 0-byte connection IDs are fine because from Quic's perspective, you're not migrating. But as a general statement, I think the spec is correct as it stands today. You cannot migrate if you have a 0-length connection ID because the 5-tuple is what's protecting you from arbitrary junk being injected.
or should not. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it seems like disallowing a potentially useful use case, even if like ICE solves one particular example of peer-to-peer. I'm sure there are other people that want to do peer-to-peer without ICE, but we can always fix this in V2. I mean,
Okay. Does anyone want to support Ian's request to do this? If you're getting up to argue against it, we've heard a fair amount of that. So,
Ted Hardy, I actually think that his suggestion that we support it in V2 after we've looked at which other use cases might want to support peer-to-peer without ICE is a particularly important question, because the fact that there is one that uses ICE for this does not mean that there aren't other potential peer-to-peer use cases for WebRTC that we want to consider in V2.
So I'm hearing a proposal to flag this as V2 and close it. A thumbs up from Ted and acceptance. Oh, a thumbs up from Ian. Okay. Can we just move on, or do you guys want to modify that?
Just that bracketing the ICE stuff, is this not the use case that we were in search of in 2471 from going to zero-length CID to non-zero-length CID? Okay.
All right.
Oh, wait, sorry. I can't close that. We need to establish that on the list. And
Next one is Kazuo's. Rate limiting of SID issuance needs to be allowed. 2436.
There was a PR and it was merged.
Okay.
Okay.
I like how
Thank
you roll.
Let's stick with Kazuo's issues for a second.
Let's do that process. So why is the issue still open? What's happened here?
Chair failure, probably.
No, I think, was that done before we adopt the new process, perhaps?
Yeah, February 22.
Okay. So I will flag this as, we just need to establish consensus. So I'll do has proposal with, oops, we already put it in there. All right. That takes us to 2403 from Tetsuhiro. Number of connection IDs is unbounded to new connection ID sender.
So you here, or can anybody summarize for him?
So. You want to give it a go, Ian? Okay.
Yeah, this is the previous issue, isn't it? Scrolling past at speed is not going to help answer the question.
The cosmic array affected my browser to display must instead of should.
Yeah, I think this one was resolved. Yeah,
it was resolved.
Can we juke this one to the other, the last one?
So it's not. It's
2436.
Okay. Excellent.
Sorry, which one?
It's right there, 2436. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Done.
Next one is Ian's 2400 round number. Version negotiation packets may be dropped more often when quick bit is 0.
So this is a really simple issue, so I'm sure it's going to get like extra bike shading. But the version negotiation packet is currently the only packet in the quick wire format that does not have the quick bit set to 0 as required by every other packet. And my concern is that ossification is probably going to happen. And so if you don't specify this, like people may have their version negotiation packets randomly dropped and be very curious as to why in some networks. And so I'm strawman proposing we just give up and set it to 1. But
yeah, the bike sheds.
Because I'm trying to accept reality. Like I'm willing to like give up on 1 bit on 1 packet that we almost never use, I guess is the point. But I don't know, maybe people have strong objections to this, or maybe people think my concerns of ossification are ill-founded. But I've already talked with middle box vendors who are like, oh, I can just look at 1 bit? That's awesome.
Every time we have a discussion that's 1 bit, the queue gets super long.
Try 'em all.
Martin Thompson, I think Ian's probably right. I would not want to mandate that endpoints only accept version negotiation packets that have this bit set. but I would certainly respect an encouragement to set it in the spec. I think that's about the appropriate level that we can put this at. It would be nice if it could be sort of greased a little, but I'm not really going to aspire to those heights. So a should set to 1 is what I'm proposing here.
And must ignore and receive. Yeah.
Mike Bishop, I will point out that the quick bit is in version 1 and the version negotiation packet is in the invariants. So I think really the question here is, do we want to put the quick bit in the invariants? Or do we just want version 1 to say, well, when you're picking your random value up there, we encourage a random value that starts with 1?
Oh, man.
You don't have to.
I mean, this is, no, it's just so fraught. I mean, given that VN now really has the semantics, I'm sorry, you're screwed. Loss of VN does not strike me as going to have much impact on whether or not, like...
to the mic, please.
Sorry. Loss of VN does not seem like it's going to have much impact on whether or not, like... So the premise of, like, us setting these bits is that, is that we're going to get quick deployed, and that these bits are going to move, are going to change, and that if mailboxes like screw these bits, then we'll notice and they'll get blamed because the connections break, right? But the problem is because VN already means you're hosed. Like if middle boxes block these, it's just not going to be like a noticeable kind of like problem for people. It's just going to be part of the ambient, like Quic is busted environment situation, especially if it's busted environments anyway. So if we want to claw back the quick bit, we got to have it be changed on a packet we actually care about, not this packet.
Jamayanga, just to be clear too, at a first level, if you're thinking about bits getting ossified, it's like way down that rabbit hole of ossification. And I'd ask the question that Ecker asked earlier, and I might actually go ahead and agree with him on this one, that we need to be clear about what the threat model is here. And separately said, there's also the question of coexistence with other protocols, and that's one of the reasons why we ended up with the 0 in this particular place. And as long as we want to do that, we are going to want to keep the 0 there.
Yeah, it's 0 in VN, it's 1, or it's unspecified in VN and it's 1 otherwise.
It's 1 otherwise, sorry, yes. The 1 in the other case, yeah.
Hi, Brian Trammell. I feel like, I'm in line and Ecker and John agree with each other, so I'm going to have to agree with them as well. I will point out at the point that we decided to call this the quick bit, we gave up on calling it back. And then I think we can have a question post V1 as to, well, we can have a question when we close the invariance as to whether we want to put it in the invariance now or later.
I have an idea. Sorry, Martin Thompson, I have an idea. It may be a bad one. There's a lot of settings in which this bit isn't useful. If we allow endpoints with awareness of their setting to signal the fact that they would like to set it to 0 occasionally, that might work. Now, it would have to be mutual because I believe that there are certain deployments that really rely on the value being 1. But that would allow us to grease it. Now, that's an extension, and we don't have to deal with it right now. But it means that we potentially don't have to worry about the ossification problem as much. Yeah, Brian's saying, look at this poor naive fool.
Jonathan Lennox. Since one of the purposes of the quick bit is for the demux with other protocols, notably stun if you're running over ice, does it need to be 1 actually for a reason as opposed to just for the sake of the rest of the network? I mean, certainly if you're in any position where you're doing demux, you probably need to set the quick bit.
So, Ian, what do you like to do with your issue? Martin's.
I'm going to make a proposal.
Yeah, go for it.
Concrete proposal. It's the same one that I made before, which is that we say that when generating a version negotiation packet, endpoints should set this bit to 1 because that will make it look like every single other version 1 Quic packet. Endpoints must ignore the value as specified in the invariance document. And that's advice that would be constrained to the Quic version 1 protocol specification. And we can explore, optimistic ideas for getting it back in extensions. That's my proposal. I'm hearing some, that sounds good to me.
I see thumbs up. I see some nodding heads. I see more nodding heads. I see lots of nodding heads. If I say nodding heads enough, you'll all just nod, right? Okay.
Is that your band?
Talking heads, nodding
the nodding heads. No, assign it to MT.
Oh well.
While you're writing this up, next one is one of Mikkel's, spoofed retry token attack on IP authentication 2394. Anybody have stayed on this one? It's been a Mikkel and Kazuo discussion. And Martin has the last comment on it. If nobody has stayed, I think we'll go to the next one, which would be 2389. Be clear about the purpose of disable migration, which is a Martin Thompson issue, with no comments on it yet.
Martin, is it useful to talk about this?
No, this is not useful to discuss. We discussed this in Tokyo. I think we just need to do some work.
2388, articulate principles of definition for error codes. Useful.
Again, this is another one we discussed in Tokyo, and
I remember.
We need to do some work.
Remember that pain. 2387, write up a security target against on-path attack. That sounds very similar. 2360, zero RTT flow control limits.
It has a subject, but nothing else.
Yeah. That was just a reminder we gave to ourselves
exactly.
to do some work, and we haven't done the work yet, so let's do the work. 2360, zero RTT flow control limits can't be increased.
Okay, can I step in here just for a moment?
Sure.
You moved past things that I wish you hadn't. 2389 specifically, I don't think it's design.
2389.
Yeah, it's basically asking for textual articulation of why disabling migration is a thing. It's not asking for a new mechanism. It's not asking to change anything.
I think we need to get agreement that the description matches everyone's reality, though.
Well, that's editorial still.
Does anyone want to get consensus on text to solve this issue, or does everyone comfortable trusting the editors to document what they understand to be consensus? Gentlemen, hi.
So Jana believes that he understands exactly what disable migration is for.
Yes.
I don't believe there's consensus about that
That's what I suspect as well.
And we had a very long discussion in Tokyo about this one related to other things.
Leave it in design.
And I think we need to have working group consensus on what this is for, what it is good for, and then we'll produce some text on that.
I'm much more comfortable.
But I would rather not discuss that here because we haven't done the groundwork.
Which takes us to 2360, zero RTT flow control limits can't be increased. Martin.
Mike Bishop, I think this is a duplicate of the one we discussed earlier.
Which one?
The one about forcing clients to switch to one RTT.
The one that Kazuo points out there. You go down. This one. 245.
Yes, I'll sort this one out. 2466 is one of the PRs. You can follow the thread back if you like. 2458.
We believe this is a dip of 2458? All right, we'll confirm that.
Ian Sweat, Google. Can I ask, it seems like we're going through all the issues that were gone over in Tokyo for the most part. Do Martin or anyone else have transport issues that they think are open that we haven't gone over in Tokyo and haven't gone over here?
I asked the editors that before this meeting.
Well, no, I mean right now. Like we're now just going through the same ones. These are definitely like almost all like we went over this in Tokyo. We didn't write text.
Right.
Okay.
So I think
it is 10:30, which means we have half an hour left, and we have the if time permits session, and we have the next steps session. So maybe
are there any natural stopping point?
Yeah.
Are there any HTTP issues? Is there like one that needs to be closed? I don't know, Mike. No, or just kill it.
Yeah. So just to be clear, when we do prep for these meetings, that's why we ask you guys, are there important issues? And only one cluster was brought forth this time, which was the key stuff.
And to be clear, I would have been happy spending a little bit more time on that one, but I don't think the rest of the room would. So we won't subject them to that.
Okay. All right. Before we get to those presentations, very briefly, I remembered something that I wanted to cover quickly. When we talk about this new process, one of the things that Lars and I use to judge whether or not we should discuss these issues in triage is how much interest is in the working group is expressed in them. So if these issues are interesting to you, it's helpful for us to know that. You can express that by commenting on the list or commenting on the issue, or even going to the issue and reacting to it, with a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Doesn't matter which one. That's a signal to us that
text
you think
would be slightly more informative for us than to thumbs up. Text or some more content would be better than a thumbs up, but a thumbs up is better than nothing.
Exactly. But an issue that has no engagement whatsoever from the rest of the working group tells us that there's not a lot of interest in discussing. We'll confirm that before we close it, with prejudice, but it helps us if you tell us which ones you're interested in discussing. So please take a look at the issues list from time to time and do that. And the easiest way to do that is to look at this triage list. So that takes us to the next part of our agenda, which is the as time permits bucket. And I think first we have Sherry, who was sitting there yesterday, but now is back here.
Do you want to do the next steps? Would you want to do those first? The planning, I would maybe do that first. It's not going to be very long.
Yeah, Sherry, why don't you get set up, because I know you want to use your own computer,
yeah.
right?
And Manasi, if you have slides, I really need them now.
They're in.
They're in? Okay,
Yeah.
then I didn't pay attention. Thank you. Sorry. Right.
Go ahead and get set up. I'll move out of your way.
So,
Sorry? Why don't you stand in front of the mic? And I'll press this.
And there's one more thing about the video you need to.
we are in the planning part. Future meetings, right? So we talked about this earlier. We're going to have an interim meeting in London, if there is still a London.
Bring canned food.
I'm not. We're going to have an interrupt as well.
Right. So it'll be 2 days of interrupt, 2 days of meeting. The meeting, I think, will be much like we saw today, where we just go through the issues and slug through them and try and make as much progress as possible. I think the question is, from the editor's perspective, can we get a sense of when the next draft that you want to publish is? Do you intend to publish between now and London, Martin Thompson?
The answer is always the same. When would you like one?
Before
and
London.
I think it makes sense to do something before London.
Sure.
But there's not a lot of changes. Just to be clear.
Yeah, that's fine.
And the real question will be, what do people want to interoperate with?
Yes.
And whether the changes that we have are those that they want to implement. I suspect that they're small enough that it's probably a good idea to do that.
Yeah.
If you were to publish, say, next week or thereabouts.
Yeah.
Or no, so I mean,
So
it's
ask me when.
end of May, right? So I think as long as we get a -20, like first half of April, I think they should still, because there's not a lot of changes, as you said. I think
Right.
we can still interrupt on -20 in London.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny when he says these things. I could publish right now if you want one.
Actually.
Okay. So drop a draft first week or two of April, interrupt on that in London. Virtual interrupt was the other question.
Yeah, that one, it's easy to do. I'm happy to do a doodle poll. I will not forget to email you the list this time with the date we actually picked. Sorry about that. I only put it on the Slack. We can have a discussion on whether we want to do 18, 19, or 20, depending on when that draft drops and where the implementations are. But it's easy to do one. If people want to do one, we'll just do that.
Right. And I think in London, one of the main things that we'll discuss besides the issues is getting the HTTP draft and the recovery draft into this late process.
Right. So if you want people to do work on recovery, which we talked about earlier here, then it might be useful for them to actually look at the latest drafts rather than the older ones. Actually, it might be super useful for them to not look at anything before 19, because we changed the timeouts
and recovery especially, because there's no interrupt problems here, right? So you can always implement the latest recovery and not have a problem interrupting.
Yeah, so the draft, they're not bound to the draft numbers there.
Sure.
Yeah, I want to support the let's interrupt on 20 and let's get a 20 basically as soon as the editors feel like they've gotten, like as soon as the editors can within the rubric of whatever changes they think are outstanding worth making. So like I would say first week of April would be excellent.
Okay.
Because like, you know, I already had to do a bunch of like crap to like go back to 18 even after I already implemented basically 19. So like sooner the better.
Okay. That sounds like a plan.
Right. We're going to have a meeting in Montreal. It's likely going to be again 2 sessions. It depends a little bit what we're going to do with those 2 sessions, basically what happens between now and then. In an ideal world, I think Montreal could be a meeting where we might, instead of slogging through the issues, actually have a discussion on the 2 things that people seem to want to do next, which is either media or like unreliable stuff over Quic and or multipath. That kind of depends a little bit on whether we will have the time. Whether or not we're going to have more working group interims after London also depends on whether people will want to make, specifically implementers and deployers, will want to make rapid progress on either unreliable traffic over Quic and or multipath. Because I think rapid progress means not just meeting during the IETF week. It's a trade-off, and we need to come to some consensus on that.
Sure. And yeah, Spencer mentioned one of the things that we can do is request 3 sessions. So in Montreal, we might even talk about requesting an extension session, for example.
Yeah. When are we becoming an area?
Sorry. Oh, no. We'll get there. Shh, don't tell them about the plan yet.
But I think that the milestones say that we're going to send the draft to the ISG in July. That is aspirational at this point, I would say. I still hope, though, that we can do it after the summer and then really enter a phase where we keep them open and we, based on my feedback from the deployments, decide that they're baked enough to stamp them with the ISG.
You use words like summer. How offensive that is to me. All right.
Hemispherism, I know.
You are
I think Lars actually meant the Australian summer.
It's true.
Hey, so I live in Finland now, huh? Do you think I have a concept of summer?
As always, our focus is on V1 first. So if we have a lot of discussion, a lot of issues to get through with V1, that's what we'll be spending time on mostly. The anticipation is that once we get another draft or 2 out, the issue discussion will die down somewhat as implementers implement, and we try and get some actual deployment experience with this protocol. And then we can feed back that experience into our discussions. And during that time is when we're hoping we can ramp up some of those extension discussions as appropriate. And of course, always prioritizing the V1 work where we need to.
The other thing before we go to Sherry, and sorry for making you wait that long,
is
so we have a second academic workshop on Quic co-located with ACM SICOM in Beijing in August. As a side note, Subodh's keynote video was finally posted by the ACM yesterday. They apparently have a problem of understanding that people might give talks without also submitting papers, and so the digital library couldn't handle that. But they finally figured that out, and it's online, and you can look at it, and Robin is going to put it on YouTube or something. It's a great keynote talk. So if you do academic work, or if you do, or if you're in industry and you want to talk to people who do academic work and maybe hire their students, come there. We're looking for somebody from industry to give another great keynote like Subodh did. So if you're planning on doing anything cool with Quic, especially in terms of large deployments, over the next few months, and if you feel like you're ready to talk about that in August, we would be happy to have you come and do that. EPIC is EPIQ. If you Google for that and the word SICOM, you will find the call for papers and anything else that you want to know. Thanks for letting me advertise.
Sure. And with that, Sherry, take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Sherry Shi from Google. I work on connection migration. So in the next 10 minutes, I will be talking about the connection migration deployment experience. So if you have any questions, you should feel free to ask. Next slide, please. As many of you may have already known, connection migration aims to seamlessly migrate unfinished requests between the different network interfaces. The most famous scenario is a parking lot problem. Here's a demo. Next slide. Click on the video. So in the video, the user is walking out of an office building and he starts a query for the directions to the Oxford Circus. So on the right-hand side, the phone has a connection migration enabled and the left one doesn't. So you could see that the right one almost have the response immediately and the left one is still waiting and waiting and waiting. So it has a response back about 10 seconds later. This is what connection migration does. It will try to solve the parking lot problem. Next slide, please. Before we really get into the details about the deployment data and experience, I think it's very helpful to keep in mind that there are several different types of signals that could trigger a connection migration attempt. The first one is a platform notification, which is delivered by the platform telling you about your network status. For example, your current network is being disconnected, your new network is being connected or made by default. And the second type is called write errors. This happens when you try to write a packet to the socket. Usually there comes with a net error code, and some of those write errors can be a preemptive signals telling you that your network is going to change. And the third one is the parse degrading detections. This is implemented in the Quic layer based on the retransmission timeout, and it tells you that your network parse is probably not doing very good. Next slide, please. So now let's get started with the data. When we first analyzed the application data about 2 years ago, we find that about 2% of the requests failed with a network change, meaning during the lifetime of those requests, there's at least one network change, and those requests failed because of the changing state. And we saw that this is really something that connection migration might have an opportunity to attack and solve. Next slide. So with that initiative, we dug into the connection level metrics, and we find that about 7.9% of the connections are closer due to the network being changed, and about 0.7 connections are encountering those preemptive packet write errors. Those are caused by the net error change. So adding together, it's about like 8.6% of the connections that may be subject to connection migration. With that incentive, we implemented the connection migration stage 1. We migrate the connections on platform notification and preemptive packet write errors. We ship that in ChromeNet, which is a library packaging the Chrome networking stack, and we deploy that in the Android Google search app, which is also used for the demo purpose. The results come back, and it was really reliable. The data shows that the confidence level is about 99%, and we find that this feature reduces the text search failure rate by about 0.7%, and for the cancel rate, it's reduced about 0.3%. So some of you may recall in the previous slides, we mentioned that there are about 2% of the requests failing due to the network change. And what we are seeing here is about like 1%. In fact, those improvements we listed here is across the board, not just the 2% of the requests we are targeting at. So you're right, there's a gap in the opportunity size and the deployment data. Next slide, please. So we dug into the connection level metrics again after deployment, and we find that of all the packet write error signals, 99% of the time, the connection's handshake hasn't been confirmed, which means that we cannot do the migration for the same connection. And for all those triggered connection migration attempts, 31% of the time, the connection doesn't have an alternate network, which means your connection has nowhere to migrate to but to stay on the original network. And this is also proved by different versions of Android, like Android. The latest Android version will keep the cellular on, and that has a better data on this feature. Additionally, we also find that some connections can detect the parse degrading before the platform notification. So we saw that this might also be an opportunity to do the early migration, which will beat the platform notifications. Next slide, please. So with that, the aggregator comes back, and it's about like 1.1% of the connections detect a parse degrading before the platform notification, and about 5.6% of the connections fails with a handshake on the original network. Next slide, please. And we saw that for the first case that we detected parse degrading before the platform notification, we could trigger a connection migration on parse degrading, which is a different mode of the connection migration, and tries to probe the alternate network. And once the probing turns out to be successful, we will migrate to the alternate network. And for the second case, that the handshake timeout on the original network, we could also solve the before handshake cases by spinning up a new connection on the alternate network. But the spin up the new connection is very specific for the implementation. So different versions of Quic might have different implementations. Next slide, please. So we shipped that, and we experimented. We migrate the connection on parse degrading, and we also try to kick off a new connection on the alternate network before the handshake. We experimented this feature in the Android Google Search app, and the data comes back. It's very impressive that this feature, stage 2, greatly improved the search latency for both voice search and text search. In particular, for text search, you can see that almost at every percentile, the server response time has been greatly improved. Additionally, we also find that the text search failure rate has been improved by about 1.4%, and the cancel rate has been reduced by 1.9%. So today, we are still continuing working on the connection migration at Google, and we are working with different applications, try to deploy this feature to solve the connection migration for different use cases. Next slide, please. So looking back, we think that there are...
Can I ask you a question about this data?
This is the last slide, so let's finish that.
Oh, sure. Okay.
There are 2 slides.
I'm sorry.
There are 2 more slides. Let me finish first. So looking back, we think that there are 2 really important principles to follow in the implementation. The first one is that never fail a request if it ever had a chance to succeed. This is very subtle. If you have been following the connection migration work in Google very closely, the version we deployed here is version 2. And what we do in version 2 is that we will always try to probe an alternate network when the original network turns out to be working. So this is trying to ensure that if the new network is not fully ready, we won't fail the request immediately. And the second principle is that you will always want to respect the platform's choice of the default network. This is trying to be making sure that your data usage is more consistent with the user's expectation. And we also introduced a new concept called migrate back to the default network in connection migration. In particular for the parse degrading cases, so that if the platform never changes the default after your migration, then we thought that, well, maybe this is a hint that you should try to migrate back. Next slide, please. So to summarize what we have been doing in the deployment, we took a connection migration signal, which can be a platform notification, a packet write error, a parse degrading signal, handshake timeout signal on the original network. Then we check the handshake status. If the handshake hasn't been confirmed, we will spin up a new connection on the alternate network. If the handshake has already been confirmed, then we will check if the original network is completely broken. If it's completely broken, we will do immediate migration to the alternate network. If the original network may still have a chance to survive, then we will try to do the probing on the alternate network and then migrate to the alternate path. So I think that's all for my presentation. Thanks, and I will take the questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
So
Very interesting.
sorry, we're very time constrained, so I'm going to close the queue and ask you to keep to a strict 30 seconds each. Go.
I can do that.
I know you can.
Can you go back 2 slides? Thank you. No, that one. Perfect. So I'm just trying to interpret this data. You say you're getting a very substantial improvement in text search at 50th percentile, right? Mm-hmm. But I would assume the vast majority of searches do not involve migration scenarios. So why are you seeing improvement at 50th percentile?
I think this is aggregated data, and in particular for the application search, they also do the retries. So So a request starts with the application, and if that doesn't proceed, and then it will do a retry on the application layer. So this is and what the data we collected is for a particular user-initiated request. So if you have the request started, and usually you would try to get the time. If you don't have the connection migration, you will get a timeout, and then the retry, and then the retry. But if the new positive grading and before handshake is kicking in, then the very first time you start a request, before you get the timeout, we will try to do the migration on positive grading.
I'm sorry, I was asking a different question. What I mean is most searches happen when people stay on the same network. And so why are you seeing any improvement at the 50th percentile? Has this already been trimmed down to people experiencing migration?
This is in general for all the populations doing search.
Okay, maybe take it offline.
Yeah. And
maybe take it offline. Thank you. When I say maybe, I mean do it.
Definitely do it. Eric Kinnear, Apple. I just wanted to say thank you for sharing this data, and I think this is really promising. I would be interested in digging into the data a bit more offline and kind of discussing some of those questions and looking at it. But I think I also want to echo support for the idea of migrating back when the platform decides that, respecting that path selection and saying, if we think it's available now, let's migrate back. I think that's really nice, and it's great to see this data, and thank you for sharing it.
Sure.
Tommy Polly, Apple. Again, echoing that, thank you. This is really good. Good to see this. There was one case you mentioned earlier about, I think some hardware devices won't have the cellular radio up already, and so then the migration may fail because that network is not available. Is that because essentially if that is not available at the moment, we give up immediately? Because we've had some experience with this, and adding in the ability for migration to have a delay to say, if there is no available network, at least give it some time, wait for radios to come up. Are you guys doing something like that?
Yes, we do have a migration timeout. If we don't, when the migration signal is received, we think that we will attempt to do the migration, not immediately do the connection migration. But if there's no alternate network, we will start a timer to wait for a new network being pulled up. I believe that today we use about 10 seconds. If the network is coming back, then we will try to do the migration on the alternate network. If the network doesn't come, then we will abort the migration and we claim that, well, we can't do anything. This is the end of the day.
That makes sense. It'd be great to have some of that advice brought into documentation for us.
Yeah.
Hi, Florin Baboscu, Broadcom. A few issues here. You gave an original use case, which is a parking lot. I can come up with a different use case, which is a car stopping as a traffic light. At that moment, practically, you may not actually want to do something like this, because once you don't have the Starbucks access that happen to be seen as a traffic light, you may still have wanted to keep your solar connection, for example. Second, there are already various metrics that are used into a handset device in order to do both access selection and possible steering traffic across multiple accesses. In this particular scenario, practically consider an application level decision, so taking this action.
Is there a question coming, because we really
so that's why what I try to say, that while in principle it's simple and nice to have, however, once you are looking into the context of overall handset and how it fits, maybe a different discussion.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Igor Bolushev, Akamai. So first, thank you for doing the experiment and sharing the data. The question is, what the kind of properties that you tried to do experiment with, any of them were Anycast properties? And if so, did you have experience of what happens if you go to a different Anycast node with connection migration?
I think we are doing any... Good question. I can't remember we are doing Anycast or Unicast. Maybe Ian have more details on that.
Ian Sweat, Google. I'm fairly sure the majority of IPs were Unicast, if not all of them. So Anycast was certainly not the dominant portion of this traffic.
All right.
So you
Thank
don't.
you.
So you do not have the data for of any cast addresses. How often you would end up in a different pub after connection migration?
I think we're planning to log those data, but we haven't collected that data yet. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you so much, Sherry.
And sorry for not filling you in yesterday. Right. Final quick presentation. Again, if you have questions, they will need to be quick. You can find both of the presenters after the session, I'm guessing, if you have more questions. Go.
Hi, my name is...
Get closer to the mic. Very close.
Okay. Hi, my name is Manasi.
Even closer. Really, you have to...
Sorry. There you go.
Hi, my name is Manasi Deval. I work at Intel. All right.
Yes.
And I'm showing some data here, which is related to an offload and some measurements that we did with Quic. So what we did is we went ahead and created an offload where we can do encryption offload as well as transmit segmentation offload. And we tested this out with the Chromium stack. We have a toy server stack which we optimized to run at 25 gigs. We also scaled the server to run that network throughput with minimal number of cores. So you can see we are first bandwidth saturated, and then after that, we have some minimal CPUs that we would use to achieve this. So next slide, please. And we got some reasonable performance. The crypto offload showed a 13% CPU savings, which looked quite reasonable, considering this is a real application and not a micro benchmark. In a micro benchmark, we can expect this to look higher. To the crypto-only offload, we added segmentation offload. And over there, we expected the numbers to actually be quite a bit higher because the micro benchmark numbers for segmentation offload are quite significant. The 3% increase over the crypto was a little bit surprising. So we went back and did some more testing to see why these, why we see a limit. And when we did some more detailed testing, we tested out two different configs. We tested out the standard 64K segmentation against the 9K. And when we, actually next slide, please. And one more. Okay. And when we did this, actually, can you go forward one? I think I have one. Yeah, so that's the data I want to show before going back to the other slides. So when we did this, we found that segmenting 9K versus 64K looked almost the same. And digging into it further, we found that the reason they look similar was even though the hardware or the GSO could accelerate this a little better, the time that we were saving by bypassing the stack was being spent in framing the segmentation blob that would be sent down. So basically savings on one side were spent as cycles on another. So that gave us the idea to think that, the way USO is being done is great. It's a really good starting point, but we might need to do something more. And something more looks a lot like TCP, where we send a whole bunch of data to the hardware and let the hardware take care of the framing, not just with like L2 MAC IP UDP, but also the Quic header. When we try to do that, we get into some complications. So can we go to the next slide? Okay. So this is an example of a segmentation offload that is like a TCP. So at the top layer, you see a Quic header with one or more stream payloads, maybe an ACK interleaved in there. And we would have to give this information to the socket with some very detailed information about what is in that, blue blob of data. When it comes to the hardware, we can potentially segment it like the bottom part below. Okay, so we can have the payloads, the acts, and so on segmented as per the rules of the segmentation. In order to do this, we have a little bit of a problem with how we can achieve this. Sending a whole bunch of metadata in the Linux stack met with a little bit of pushback already. So the combined way to do this is we could modify the ACK header and have an ACK length in there. If there's an ACK length, then it's parsable by the hardware, and it reduces the need for that much metadata to flow in the stack. If we do that, it's a happy medium of both worlds. And that is what I was hoping we could all agree on at some point in the future. Okay.
Is that all you have?
Yeah.
Okay. So that sounds like a request to add an ACK length to the frame. And I think what we could do is open an issue. We can help you do that if you need it, and then discuss whether there's at least interest in discussing that as a group. Based on the conversations I've seen in hallways so far, I think there is, and we can move forward with that. Martin.
Yeah, just one comment, if you don't mind. There is a lot more in what we did. This is sort of the most important one that I wanted to bring up here, and more discussion at 4 o'clock today at Congress 3.
Oh, that's right. You have a session this afternoon.
That's right.
Lovely.
Yeah. So Martin Thompson, this is good work, and I kind of like the fact that you've done the hard work of working out what's important. The critical thing here is to optimize those things that we send a lot, and you've identified stream and ACK as being those critical ones, which I think is correct. There already is a length in ACKs. It's just a different style of length, and I don't think there's any significant problem with moving it and recasting a little bit from my perspective. But I'd like to make sure that we are confident that this sort of segmentation is necessary, because it might be possible, for instance, to only send ACKs through a segmentation optimized path and stream data on another one.
We're 1 minute over already, so I'm going to cut the line after.
The queue is cut, and we need very short comments.
There is a side meeting Manasi mentioned, and it is also sent to the list, so please do come to that later this afternoon if you want to talk about this in more detail.
Okay. Well, two things very quickly. First, I want to thank Mansi for doing the work, and it's also for being patient with the group, because she's been coming here for a while and trying to get us to actually pay attention to this stuff for a while, and she's persisted. So I really want to call that out. Second, I don't think it's whether we need this or not, but whether it's useful or not, because that's what the question really here is. But yeah, we can continue this discussion.
I think it's at least worth discussing here.
Yes, again, Florin Brodko. Actually, we are happy with this type of work, and we think it is a way to go forward, at least if you want to make it implementable in handset. A first question to you, a single question to you. Besides the evaluation in terms of how much load you have on a CPU versus your offload engine in the context of encryption, do you also have some power numbers, if there is any benefit in the context of offloading this to a different unit?
Okay. Sorry, this isn't related to whether or not we adopt the issue, so why don't we take that offline, if you could do that, and I'd encourage you to come to the side meeting.
Yes or no, do you have power numbers?
Actually, the CPU utilization numbers map directly to power numbers.
Right. That's not a yes or no, so take it to a side conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was
Thank you
very
all.
helpful.
Make the blue sheets come up to the front. If you haven't signed them, come up to the front too. Sign the blue sheets. They're right here with Martin Seaman. See you all in
sunny
Montreal.
London.
Or sunny London.
Yes. Thank you for compressing your.
And just very quickly, we also have another side meeting for datagram stuff later today that's sent to the list. So if you want to come discuss unreliable Quic, please let's bike shed that not here.
You send me another deck. Yeah.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you so much, Dad. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So
you're right. She's been very patient.
Boring stuff on the first half. Okay.